I'm very happy that we have this event for the benefit of the victims. I'm not happy that we have to have it. I wish we didn't have to have such an event. For the 10 years or so that my sister was married, her husband abused her on a regular basis. In fact, there was a time when she was pregnant and he would punch her and kick her in the stomach, maybe to force her to abort, although eventually he wanted to have the child that they did have together. So for 10 years, I witnessed that. I went to her home many times to pick her up so that she could leave that environment, only to see her go back to the same home after a week or two. My brother was also abused by his wife. So I have witnessed it on both sides, and I'm glad that last night it was made clear that while the End It Now campaign focuses women and girls, and here in North America we're also looking at men being abused and boys being abused. In my brother's case, he was in the military, and his wife, as she would hit him, would say to him, "And you better not say anything, because I'll tell your sergeant or your lieutenant or your captain that you are abusing me." So it was a sort of a double manipulation type thing. I also know that abuse happens to boys. My wife's brother, in fact, was sexually molested by a Pathfinder director of his church for several years. And we are sure that that's what contributed to his eventual suicide. So we know that abuse takes place in many different forms. When I prepared this presentation many years ago, I prepared it with one goal in mind, or actually two audiences in mind. One of them was pastors, because there are many pastors who still don't know how to handle, how to identify abuse, much less how to handle it. I remember when I was ministerial secretary at a conference, and I received a call from a lady who said to me, "Pastor, this is what's been happening for the last 14 years since I married my husband. He's been physically abusive to me and my children." Now, as a ministerial secretary, I don't normally respond to all the calls from all the churches. It would be almost impossible. So the first thing I asked was, "Well, have you talked to your pastor?" And she says, "Yes." "Well, what did he say?" He said, "Sister, we have to pray because he is an elder." As if to say, we really can't do anything to harm him. He is an elder in the church. So we need to pray to make sure the situation gets better so that he can continue to be an elder in the church. So I prepared the presentation with pastors in mind to educate them as to the cycle of abuse and how to help the victims that come to them. In fact, last night I was talking to my friend and colleague, Dr. Edwin Mendoza, who did his dissertation on abuse, and was telling me of a case. May I mention that, Edwin? Maybe I should say. I don't know the names or the place, so I guess it's okay. A situation where an abusive husband was at his church, and as he confronted, as Pastor Dr. Mendoza confronted him, he also said to him, "I'm sorry, my brother, but you can't leave this place." And he called the police and had him arrested right then and there, because that was probably the best thing, not only for his wife, but for him. You know, we have to confront sometimes the abuser with the reality of what they're doing, so that they will take the steps necessary to stop that violence. So my first audience was pastors, to educate them, to teach them, to help them understand this dynamics of abuse and what kinds of things they could do to help those in their congregations that come to them for help. The second audience was the victims, because as I presented from church to church, I wanted them to know that they were not alone, that there were things they could plan to do, they could prepare in case it happened again. So we're not just looking at, in my presentation today, I'm not ignoring men who are being abused. I've been a police chaplain for over 25 years in 10 different law enforcement agencies, and I have been there with the officers responding to domestic disturbance calls, thinking, along with the officers, that we were going to see a man hitting a woman, or a woman with bruises or cuts, only to find a man cowering in the corner with his wife towering over him with the lamp ready to hit him. Or, and I remember, in fact, that particular case in the state of Oklahoma was a very, well, I guess I could use the word large or well-built Native American lady towering over her 5'3", about 100-pound man, husband, ready to hit him with that lamp. And if it's a good thing that it was a summer month, so that the screen door was there, not the regular door, but the screen door, so we could just open and prevent her from breaking the lamp over her husband's head. But that's not the only type. I also recall the 6'2", 250-pound man holding a chair just to keep his wife, 5'3", barely 90-pound wife, from cutting him with a kitchen knife. He wouldn't think of defending himself because she threatened him anyways. If you do anything like that, I'm going to call the police and tell them, you touched me. He wouldn't do it because he was taught by his mother, you never touch a woman. He wouldn't do it because he loved his wife. And he didn't want to call the police and have them arrest his wife. Besides, who's going to believe that I, 6'2", 250 pounds, is getting abused by my 5'3", 90-pound wife? They would think I'm not a man. You see, the dynamics are somewhat the same and yet somewhat different. So we won't talk about men's violence or women violence toward men today. I do want us to talk about women who are being abused by their husbands, their boyfriends, or the person that they live with, and what we could do to help them. Some of you are clinicians and have done research in this area. You heard it last night from Stephanie. You heard it in the video we talked about, where they talked about the cycle of violence. For those of you who are not familiar, we want to just share briefly what it is. For those of you who know it well, please bear with me this morning. The cycle of violence is predictable. It kind of follows a regular pattern. The way that we like to share it with the victims and with the pastors is to picture a clock. The clock is easy to remember. I mean, you can think of a cycle, but the clock is easier to remember for some people. So picture a clock, and we'll begin with the 3 o'clock with what is called the honeymoon phase. In fact, some of them have called it the false honeymoon because it's not really a honeymoon. It's just sort of temporary. It's false. It's a time when the abuse has just taken place, and now the abuser wants to gain back his wife, his girlfriend. And again, I'm using that terminology here. Just bear with me and think of only now of male abusing women as opposed to women abusing male, because there's a little different dynamic. But during this honeymoon phase, the batterer, the abuser, is very nice to the victim, brings her flowers and candy like he used to do or has done at some time or another. He's affectionate, he's cuddly, he calls her by pet names and so on, and it's a wonderful time. And the survivor loves it. Why wouldn't she? Isn't that what she's dreamed of? We have the relationship I've always wanted to have, she thinks to herself. But unfortunately, the honeymoon phase doesn't last, and the only reason that it exists is because the batterer, the abuser, has done something bad and is trying to make up for it, and he has beaten his wife or girlfriend and has vented his anger, and now he's afraid she's going to leave him, or she's going to call the police and they're going to arrest him, and he might lose his job and his reputation, and so he wants to gain her back and convince her that he's really not a bad guy after all. He loves her. Which is, in fact, what makes domestic violence so confusing for the victim. I can't count how many times the survivor has told me, but sometimes he's so sweet. He's not a monster. We've had some good times. And that's all true. She's not imagining any of those things. She's not making excuses. There really were good times during the honeymoon phase. But then imagine that the clock moves to the 6 o'clock phase, the normal phase or the calm phase. And picture a time when, well, it's not quite as good as the honeymoon phase, It's not bad, though. Things are still good. They've just settled down a little. The batterer, the abuser, is no longer actively romancing the survivor with candy and flowers and pet names, but they are both enjoying normal life. What we would maybe say normal for most of us or all of us. Things are pleasant and happy, and the survivor has decided that she's definitely not going to leave him. Why would she? Things are really good. He's obviously turned over a new leaf, and he's treating her well. If it could only stay that way, everything would be wonderful. It happened, I know, it's just a bad memory, but it's not going to happen again. I mean, he promised me. He swore to God. As God is my witness, he said, I'm never going to do it again. During that time, the abuser uses different tactics to achieve his goal, to regain power, control over the victim. And it's a crazy time for the victims. They don't understand how he could pretend that nothing happened. But it happened. I mean, I still have some of the bruises. They're going away. So I know it happened. But he pretends that nothing happened. So then, quietly and slowly, the relationship moves to the 9 o'clock hour, the rising tension phase. Now, the victim feels something is changing. Things are still good. The survivor has pretty much decided that her troubles are behind her and she's not going to leave, but yet there's an edge in the air. The survivor realizes the tension is building, but she doesn't know why. She may try extra hard to be agreeable. She may overlook some warning signs because she's reluctant to admit that the good times are about to come to an end. And after a while, she has to admit that the normal times are gone. The batterer becomes more and more angry. More and more abusive traits are coming back. Insults, name-calling, drinking, neglecting the family, and so on. The tension builds and builds until, of course, the explosion happens. It can take many forms, you know that. Usually it's physical violence. Sometimes the violence is purely emotional and not physical. It varies with the abuser. But when the explosion happens, there is no mistaking it. Sometimes it involves weapons. I recall a member of my church in Delaware who came to me for the first time to tell me about her abuse, and she said to me, he gives me the phone, puts the phone on my lap, and then with the gun in his hand, he says, go ahead and call him. Before they even leave the station, I will shoot you. Go ahead. Go ahead. Sometimes it involves drugs or alcohol. Sometimes it involves the police or even SWAT teams who have to respond. Sometimes it involves the hospital. Sometimes it involves, and this is the most painful thing as a chaplain to see anyways, involves the children. Because they watch first their loved ones hurting each other, or one hurting the other really. They can't do anything about it. They can scream, they can punch, but he's too big. And then they see the police coming to take him, the one we love. Now, we don't want to see him hurting mom, but we don't want to see him gone. So the abuser experiences self-directed guilt. He doesn't feel guilty or sorry for hurting the victim. He may apologize for his behavior, but his apology is designed so that he will not face the consequences or be held accountable. His goal is to reassure himself that he will not be caught, that he won't face the consequences. You following me? I'm used to church, and it's, I don't know, would it be bad to say amen? So at least I know you're paying attention. I don't know. This is one of the hardest presentations for me. Those of you who know me, you know that I enjoy using humor, but there's no humor in this. So I can't tell any jokes or show comic strips that show, because it's not funny. And that makes it very difficult. So somehow you have to show me a sign that you're awake. All right, good. The abuser then makes excuses and blames the victim for his behavior because it's not his fault, really. You made me do it. If you hadn't, common victim blaming statements usually focus on the victim's behavior. If you had the house cleaned, I wouldn't have had to hit you. If you had cooked dinner on time, I wouldn't have had to punch you in the face. You deserve it. You should have taken better care of me. Of course, the goal of that stage is to abdicate responsibility for his behavior because it's really not his fault. It's always her fault. Of course, the transition from explosion to the honeymoon phase is the only transition that is not very subtle. It happens very clearly because now he wants to make sure he gains her trust and love again. The police have left. The victim has been discharged from the hospital and surveys the physical and emotional damage. Maybe she consults a domestic violence prevention agency to see how they can help her. Maybe she doesn't, but the abuser, the batterer, contacts her as soon as he can. I mean, as soon as he gets a hold of a phone or gets a friend to pick him up at jail, to take him home, I need to see you. I need to talk to you. He feels terrible. He's very sorry. He swears that it will never happen again. In fact, because he's a very religious, spiritual person, he even says, God is my witness. He brings her presence to show how sorry he is. He brings out their wedding album. Look, remember, we're so happy. In fact, he even takes pictures, nowadays that they're digitized. He goes to Walmart and prints a whole bunch of them and makes a collage. Look, happy times. He manipulates her emotions, and they have moved into the honeymoon phase again. Now, everyone is different. There's no set time for this cycle to take place. Some couples go through the complete cycle in a month, some go through it in a week, and so some go through it several times in a day. Some take an entire year to go through a complete revolution of the cycle. Every couple, every circumstance is different. But now that you know how the cycle works, at least maybe you can look back on incidents and understand how they fit into the cycle in your relationship. I have to give you a little bit more bad news. Many victims or survivors now of battering keep remembering the honeymoon phase and the normal phase. They keep saying, if only I could stay like that, it could stay like that, I should say. That's very understandable. Of course, it makes a lot of sense. Who wouldn't want to be in that kind of a situation? But if you could only freeze the cycle down there at the 3 or even at the 6 o'clock phase, things would be great. The problem is that you can't freeze the cycle. You can't stop it unless there's some intervention. I'm sorry to say that, but you know it. You can't freeze the cycle. Your battery will keep moving through the cycle unless he receives some major intensive intervention. Anger management doesn't work. Marriage counseling doesn't work. Most programs for batterers have only, for what I understand, about a 5% success rate. The newest programs seem to be more successful, but they're rare, and lack of government funding has made them even more scarce. If you find a program that your batterer is willing to attend, go to it. Take him with you. But they don't always work. Here's another problem. As time goes by, the cycle gets shorter. You used to have an explosion once a month. Now it's every 3 weeks. In a while, it will be every 2 weeks. Batteries will tend to go through the cycle faster and faster, and their level of violence will either stay the same or, more often than not, grow worse and worse. So the cycle is not going to slow down. Either stays the same or speeds up. The violence will not diminish. It will either stay the same or get worse. Here's another complication. Imagine you're the victim. You felt the tension grow and grow. You know what's going to happen. You know he's going to explode. You just don't know exactly when. And the weight, the tension is excruciating. He's filled with rage and he can explode at any time. You know that when he does, he grabs whatever he has close to him to hit you with. And right now, guess what? You're in the living room. And when he attacks you in the living room, he hits you with pillows. When he attacks you in the kitchen, he grabs a butcher knife. So you make a quick decision and you do something to trigger his rage there in the living room because it's safer than the kitchen. Of course, for some, that's a good strategy. The tension of waiting is ended. The explosion occurs in the room without dangerous weapons, so your injuries are not as severe. The only problem is that now your batterer blames you for causing the violence. Of course, he would have blamed you either way. And then you go to a marriage counselor or the pastor, who when he hears that you triggered the violence, turns against you. Well, sister, you have to stop that. You can't keep doing that. So you're victimized again. So what can you do? None of this is any kind of happy news, but it's the truth. Your best course of action is to contact first your local authorities. Who wants to hear that? Sister, we really need to do something here. I'll give you a number to help you. It's 911. Pastor, I don't have a job. I don't have a penny. He's taken everything I have. I haven't talked to my family in 3 years because he told me I shouldn't. I don't have any friends. And now you're telling me if I call 911, they'll arrest him, he loses his job. Who's going to support us? And yet, if you don't put a stop to that cycle someplace, it's not going to stop on its own. You know that. Talk to someone you trust. And maybe I should have some of those. Call the police. Talk to someone you trust. A friend, a counselor, and again, in the church community, I would hope that that is the pastor who understands the dynamics and says, we're going to do something. I heard of a church. I would love to know which church it was and somehow replicate that model. For what I understand, when the pastor found out that the wife was being abused, immediately he arranged it so that she and her kids could go to a member's home and move from member's home to member's home every 3 days. That way, he never found out where she or where they were. They shelter her. Because it's not as easy either to simply say, you know what? Let me take you to a woman's shelter and be exposed to a lot of people and a lot of things that you may not be used to, that your children are used to, in fact, that you may not want them to be exposed to. So instead of sending them to a shelter, and praise God for shelters, the church said, we are your shelter. So every 3 days, they moved him to a safe place so he never knew where they were. And they were always at home with a church family. What a beautiful church. Instead of just simply saying, sister, you need to leave him. And go where? Well, we'll pray about it. For a victim, talk to a counselor and make a safety plan. What does that safety plan include? Well, find a place where you would go if you need to leave quickly. Plan ahead of time. Okay, if something happens again, if the explosion takes place again and I have to leave, where would I go? It could indeed well be a shelter, it could well be the church, or I know that so-and-so would take me in a second. And it's only 6 blocks away, so I need to figure out how I'm going to get there in a hurry, because if it happens, when he hits me and then he goes in to take a shower, that might be my chance to get out of there, and so I have to figure out how quickly I can get there. Do I have the keys to the car? Do I have money for the bus or the taxi? Do I have my cell phone charged, or is the phone working so I can call somebody? I have an idea of how you will get out of the house. I'm on the 2nd floor and he locks me in the bedroom. How do I get out of this 2nd floor bedroom to get to some place where it's safe? Try to stash some money away. That's going to be a challenge because he doesn't give you anything except for the bare necessities. And he counts the change when you bring it back. If you do have access to some money, open your own bank account, but make sure the bank doesn't send the statements home. Otherwise, he's going to get the mail one day and says, "What is this? What are you planning to do anyways?" In fact, let me teach you a lesson. And we're going to go to the bank right now, by the way, and close the account. Plan how to get away. Again, if you're going to drive or take the bus or a taxi or a bicycle or walk or whatever it is, have a bag ready with important documents like your ID, credit cards, insurance cards, medicine, bank information, passport, any legal documents, birth certificates, wedding or marriage certificates, restraining orders, medical records. Have a backpack for your children as well. And don't forget to stuff at least one of their favorite toys in there. You may want to stash this, by the way, with a trusted friend. Because if you leave them in the closet and he happens to be looking for his bowling ball and finds it, you're in trouble. Arrange with a friend to have an emergency phrase that your partner will not recognize. For example, set it up in advance. If you ask, "How's your dog?" that your friend will know to call the police. Oh, it's getting hot around here. I heard that it's supposed to snow. Of course, don't do that in Southern California in July. It won't work. Sometimes domestic violence shelters are full. So again, have a safety backup plan. And if a shelter is not the place where you would want to go, again, find a different place or ask someone to shelter you if the time or when the time comes. Call a local women's shelter or the National Domestic Violence Hotline and ask for legal help or legal options and resources available to you before you need them. If you have school-aged children, notify the school authorities or school counselors about custody arrangements and warn them about possible threats. Boy, that is so embarrassing, but you have to do it. Don't wait until that actually happens and you go to pick up your children in school only to find out he already told them they're not to release the children to you. Keep your communication private. It's not uncommon for an abuser to monitor mail or telephone and internet communications, and so take the precautions to help maintain your privacy and safety by following some simple steps. For instance, when it comes to a telephone conversation, avoid making long-distance phone calls from home. He could trace the calls to find out where you're going. Or be cautious when using the cell phone. Your abuser may be able to intercept conversations using a scanner. Even stars have been victims of some of those scanners. And what do they call that? Just the other day, the hackers. So switch to a corded phone if you're relaying sensitive information. Of course, nowadays, there are fewer and fewer. Be aware of controlling use of your cell phone. Your abuser may use frequent cell phone conversations or text messages as a way to monitor and control your activities. An abuser may also check your cell phone to see who has called you or who you have attempted to call. And check your messages. Computer use. If you think your abuser is monitoring your computer use, the safest bet is to access your internet at a friend's house or at the library. Use a web-based program for email, programs such as Outlook Express, Netscape Mail, or Eudora, different those ones that store things not in your computer but out in cyberspace. And change your password often. Clear your web browser history. Clear your document history. Make sure that there's no trace that he can follow. Where else can you get help? Oh, and I guess I should have put some of those things there. And we'll just go through this. Well, your doctor or hospital emergency room. You know, I don't feel like I should call the police, but I have bruises to show and I have injuries, so let me go to my doctor, because then they can become sort of the go-between with the authorities. The local women's shelter or crisis center, counseling or mental health centers. Of course, the local court, and I shouldn't have put this as last, but I did, so your church. Talk privately with your pastor and be very clear and open about your situation. There are many ways to recognize abuse. There are some signs, and again, I'm talking to some of you who have degrees on that and who could probably have a much better presentation, my audience in mind. And what I hope that you draw from here is that as you make your presentation, especially in church communities, that you have that audience in mind. They're not all clinicians, they're not all experts in the area, so you have to present it in a way that they will understand and be able to use the information. So how would you recognize whether abuse is taking place in your particular situation? So you may be a victim of abuse if you're in a relationship with someone who controls finances, so you have to ask for money. I remember my sister, who was a very able secretary. In fact, that's really what kept her getting new jobs. She had to quit her job so many times her resume could be pages long with 6 months here, a year there, 3 months there. But she was such a good secretary that when they hired her as a temporary secretary, they saw her abilities immediately and they would give her a job again. And in fact, after her divorce, she got to be a legal secretary to a senior partner in one of the largest law firms in the Washington, D.C. area. She was very good at her job. But one of the things that her husband always did was to make her quit, because why are you working anyways? I make enough money for both of us. I'll support you. You don't need to work. And she would believe that story over and over again. And of course, that was his way of controlling her, because if she had no job, she had no income, therefore she couldn't leave him. Looks at you or acts in ways that scare you. You know it. There's a certain something. You know the way he looks at you sometimes. It just bothers me. I know my sister would say that. Look at his eyes. It's as if he hates me. It's as if he's going to hurt me. Acts jealous or possessive. We saw that in the video. Or accuses you of being unfaithful with anyone and everyone. What are you looking at him for? Or what is he looking at you for? Who? You know who I'm talking about. The guy over there. She didn't even notice the guy. But he knows they're already having an affair. Tries to control how you spend your time, who you see or talk to, where you go or what you wear. You're not going out wearing that, are you? Who are you going to see anyways? What are you going to do with your friend? I don't think that's where you're going. Wants you to get permission to make everyday decisions. Because after all, you're too stupid to make your own decisions. Have I ever told you how worthless you are anyways? Without me, you wouldn't have anything. You wouldn't be anything. Which is a way to destroy her self-esteem to the point where if she ever thinks of leaving, she can't even make that decision. gets angry, of course, when drinking alcohol or using drugs. In my sister's case, neither one of them were Adventists, and so drinking for him was a daily event. In fact, he was indeed an alcoholic, and after their divorce, he actually literally ended up living in the streets of New York City until they picked him up and found out he had throat cancer, and that's what eventually caused his death. But when he drank, he was a monster. When he didn't drink, he was an angel. What a wonderful guy to be married to. Scares you by driving recklessly, especially when he's drunk. But even when he's not, if he's just angry, he will do all kinds of crazy things because he knows it scares you and it makes him feel more manly. Threatens to kill him or herself. If you ever leave me, I'm going to kill you. Or if you ever leave me, I'm going to kill myself. And if I kill myself, it's your responsibility, and you're going to live for the rest of your life with that on your head, on your conscience. You're very likely to be in an abusive relationship if you have a relationship with someone who does even one of the following. He hits, kicks, shoves, slaps, or chokes you, or threatens you with violence or with a weapon. Even once. He only did it last week. He's never done it before. Well, that's once. That's one too many. If he forces you to have sexual intercourse or engages in sexual acts against your will, but wait a minute, you're my wife, and you're going to do what I tell you. You belong to me. Don't you forget that, little lady. Calls you names, insults you, or puts you down. You're worthless. You're really lucky I married you. Yeah, wouldn't you say that? Wouldn't you say she's lucky? Prevents you from going to work or school. Stops you from seeing family members and friends. Hurts or threatens to hurt you, your children, or your pets. Not too long ago, I was watching a cop show, and that's what the ex-boyfriend did to hurt his ex-girlfriend. Took her favorite dog and tortured him in front of her, and then eventually killed the little pet. Because if I can't have you, I'm not going to go to jail for hurting you, but I'm going to hurt something that's dear to you. A living something. Destroys your property. Controls your access to medicines. Blames you for his or her violent behavior, or tells you that you deserve it. If he says that his or her abusive behavior is no big deal, in fact, it didn't really happen, you're going crazy. Tries to force you to drop the charges, either with sweetness or with more threats. And tries to prevent you from calling the police or seeking medical care. You don't need to go there. I'll take care of you. You've heard it say many times since last night, it's not about violence. It's about power and control. It's not about anger. They just tend to take their anger out on their intimate partner. But it's not really about anger. It's about trying to instill fear and wanting to have power and control in the relationship. So my appeal to you, as we are running or winding down and need a break, my appeal to you as members of the church, as pastors, as friends, as family members, let's begin by educating our faith communities, our churches. I wish, you have no idea how much I wish we didn't have to talk about this in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. In family ministries, I was talking to Deborah just yesterday, family ministries really covers women's ministries, men's ministries, children's ministries, everything, because we basically are all part of a family. One of our desires is that we, and that's why we agreed to partner with Carla, is that we would work together to see that this ends. It stops. It begins the stopping at our church communities. We have the ability to access, to reach out to the people in the pews and help them so that at least with our local congregation we can make sure it doesn't happen anymore. That we are the instruments to help the victims as well as the abusers so that it stops at home. One of my responsibilities besides family ministries is also men's ministries, and one of the goals that I have is to educate the men who are both victims and perpetrators so that they don't have to be either. Women's ministries will do their part, men's ministries has to do their part as well. But you who are here can individually do your part to see that this cycle of violence stops altogether in your church families, in your congregations, and then become instruments to also help others in the community so that we can do at least our part to see it end and for it to end now. Thank you.